Hey everyone, welcome back. Some people hear the word no and treat it like a suggestion. The coworker who decided your private birthday was her personal performance, the stepfather who promised you half then blocked you when you asked for the truth, the woman who called you a little freak in the middle of a shop then tried to jump you in the car park. Today we've got 3 stories about what happens when people ignore boundaries and find out that the person they were pushing had more allies than they expected. Here we go. Karen's coworker decided my private birthday was her personal performance. I used to work at a place that had a surprisingly nice staff cafeteria for how big the company was. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was clean, well-run, and most people actually used it instead of eating at their desks. One of the traditions they had was posting a monthly calendar with birthdays, and whenever someone's day came around, someone would ring this little bell and the whole room would sing happy birthday. It happened a couple of times a month, nothing constant. Most people seemed to enjoy it. I didn't hate the tradition, but I definitely didn't want to be part of it. I've always preferred to keep my birthday low-key, and the idea of a room full of coworkers singing at me while I sat there smiling awkwardly was not appealing. So I simply never put my birthday on the public calendar. It wasn't a secret exactly, just not something I felt the need to broadcast. Most people didn't even notice, and the few who didn't care. One of my work friends, Karen, fellow Gen X, sarcastic in the best way, knew my birthday because it happened to be the same as her mom's. On the day, she leaned over at the cafeteria table and said, "Happy birthday. At least you don't have to deal with the song circus." I laughed and said, "That's exactly why it's not on that calendar." It was a quiet moment, nothing dramatic, just 2 people acknowledging it and moving on. Unfortunately, we weren't as quiet as we thought. There was another coworker, let's call her Melissa, who had a personality that filled every room whether you wanted it to or not. She was bubbly, loud, and had absolutely no concept of staying out of other people's business. If there was a bell to ring, she was the first one sprinting toward it. If there was a personal detail to be uncovered, she was already halfway through asking questions nobody had invited. She overheard our conversation and immediately turned around, eyes wide like she'd just uncovered a scandal. "Wait, it's your birthday today?" she said, way louder than necessary. I sighed internally and said, "Yeah, but I keep it off the calendar on purpose." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't even close. "What? Why would you do that?" she asked, already halfway out of her seat. I told her calmly, "Because I don't want the attention. It's just not my thing." That should have been enough for any reasonable person. Instead, she tilted her head like I just challenged her to a personal mission. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be such a grump. It's fun. Everyone loves it." I replied, "I don't, and that's fine. Please just leave it." I thought I was being clear. Apparently, I wasn't speaking her language. You gave her every chance. A quiet no, a clear no, a direct please don't. She heard all of them and decided they didn't apply. Not because she forgot, but because she assumed her idea of fun mattered more than your comfort. That's not enthusiasm, that's just deciding other people's boundaries are optional. She grinned and said, "I'll ring it for you," like she was doing me a favor. Before I could say anything else, she popped up from her chair and marched toward the bell like she'd just been handed a trophy. I sat there for half a second, processing what was happening, then realized she was actually going through with it. The bell rang, loud and sharp, cutting through the cafeteria noise. People started turning, some already beginning to clap along, assuming this was another standard birthday moment. Melissa proudly announced my name like she'd just uncovered a hidden celebration that everyone should be grateful for. The first few notes of the song started. I stood up and walked out. No dramatic pause, no speech, just grabbed my stuff and headed straight for the door. Behind me, I could hear the singing continue for a few seconds before it awkwardly fizzled out. Apparently, singing happy birthday to an empty chair doesn't hit quite the same. I didn't look back, but I could already picture the confusion spreading across the room. Later, I found out Melissa stood there asking, "Why did he leave?" Like she couldn't possibly figure it out. That's when Karen snapped, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Because he told you he didn't want this," she said. "You need to learn to respect people's boundaries." That word, boundaries, apparently hit harder than anything else said that day. Of course, HR got involved, not because of what Melissa did, but because Karen called her out a little too directly. The next day, we were both pulled in for a conversation. I explained exactly what happened, including how I'd clearly said no, and how it was ignored. They started asking why I kept my birthday private, digging for some deeper explanation. I wasn't in the mood to entertain that. I told them I had personal reasons and left it at that. When they kept pressing, I said, there's a reason it's private. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't make a scene. I removed myself from a situation I didn't consent to. Now I'm being questioned about personal matters that have nothing to do with my job. Then I added, if this keeps going, I'll be escalating it. That shut things down pretty quickly. A few days later, an email went out to the entire company about respecting personal boundaries in the workplace. There was even a short training session attached to it, which most people treated like a formality, but everyone knew exactly why it was happening. During that session, someone suggested voting on whether to keep the bell tradition at all. A bunch of people glanced at me, probably expecting me to vote against it. I didn't. I voted to keep it. The issue was never the bell. It was the assumption that everyone wanted the same experience and that no was just a suggestion. The bell stayed, but the way people approached it changed. Suddenly, asking first became the norm, which was all I ever wanted. Melissa didn't get fired or anything dramatic, but she definitely got a reality check. Between that incident and a few others, her reputation took a hit. People started jokingly saying, boundaries please, whenever she got a little too involved in something that wasn't her business. She laughed it off at first, but you could tell it stuck. As for me, she barely spoke to me after that unless it was strictly work-related. Honestly, that was the best outcome I could have asked for. And our second story. My stepfather promised me half, then blocked me. I didn't sue, I just made sure his friends knew exactly what kind of man he is. Last year, my mom passed away the day before my birthday after about 5 months of suffering. It all happened faster than expected, and by the time she realized how serious things were, it was too late to get a will done. The last time I saw her, she brought it up herself. She apologized and told me everything would go to her husband automatically and that I probably wouldn't see any of it. It wasn't about the money in that moment, it was the fact that she felt bad about leaving things like that. After she passed, that's exactly what happened. Everything went to her husband, legally and cleanly. At first, I didn't push anything because I was still grieving, and honestly, I trusted him. He'd been part of her life for years, and he was the only person left who shared that connection with me. When he told me he planned to give me half anyway, I was surprised, but grateful. Your mom would have wanted you taken care of, he told me. I'll make sure you get your share. I believed him. For a while, I didn't even bring it up again because I assumed it would happen when things settled. But after a couple of months, I started asking for updates, just casually at first. That's when things started getting strange. Every time I asked, there was a different excuse. One week it was paperwork delays, the next it was issues with the bank. Then it turned into vague promises about sending it soon. Weeks passed, then months, and nothing ever actually happened. It was always just out of reach. Next week, I promise, he'd say. Then next week would come and go, and it would shift again. At one point, he even told me he was expecting a huge inheritance from a relative overseas, something like $1 million. He said once that came through, he'd give me even more than what he originally promised. That's when it really started to sound off. You just need to be patient, he kept saying. It'll all work out. But nothing was working out. It was just delay after delay with no actual progress. Eventually, it stopped feeling like bad timing and started feeling like I was being strung along. So the next time we spoke, I didn't sugarcoat it. I think you're lying to me, I said. There was a pause, then he got defensive right away. I can't believe you'd accuse me of that, he said, like I'd crossed a line. Before I could respond, he hung up. When I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. A few minutes later, I realized he'd blocked me completely. That was it. No more contact, no more promises, nothing. He spent months stringing you along, feeding you excuses and fantasy inheritances, the whole time knowing he'd never intended to give you anything. The moment you called it what it was, a lie, he didn't try to defend himself. He just hung up and blocked you. That's not anger. That's the silence of someone who knows you're right. For a few days, I didn't do anything. I just sat with it, trying to figure out if there was anything I could actually do. Legally, there wasn't much. Everything had gone to him, and without anything in writing, I didn't have a case. I could either accept it or find some other way to deal with it. Then I remembered something he used to talk about all the time. His brother had done something similar when their father passed, taking control and keeping everything. He'd go on about it, how unfair it was and how much it messed him up. It was something he clearly never got over. And now he was doing the same thing to me. I couldn't see his private contacts online, but I could see people interacting with his public posts. Friends commenting, people leaving birthday wishes, bits of his social circle that were easy to find. So I decided to reach out. I kept the message simple and factual. I explained who I was, what happened after my mom passed, and what he'd promised me. No exaggeration, no insults, just the truth laid out clearly. Then I sent it to anyone who seemed close enough to him to care. I don't know exactly what came of it, and honestly, I don't need to. I know how people react when money's involved, especially when they realize there's more to the story. Conversations happen, questions get asked, and things don't stay quiet for long. He spent years talking about how it felt to be on the receiving end of that kind of betrayal. Now he gets to hear that same story, just with his name in it instead. And our last story. The woman who called me a little freak and tried to jump me in the car park just learned that metal posts don't care about her entitlement. A few years ago, I had a routine that made the world feel manageable. Same bus, same shop, same list folded neatly in my pocket. The store manager, Linda, had known my mom for years, back when they worked together at my old school, and because of that, the place felt safer than most. I'd always ask at the front desk, quietly, if someone's free, could I get a bit of help today? It wasn't a demand, just a small anchor in a day that could easily tip sideways. That day started like any other. Fluorescent lights, humming, shelves stacked too tightly, people moving faster than my brain liked. Teresa, one of the staff, gave me a quick smile and said, I'll keep an eye out for you, yeah? I nodded, clutching my list like it might run off if I didn't. I took my time, comparing prices, making sure what I bought would last the week. That kind of thinking takes energy, and when you're trying to stay calm at the same time, every little thing matters. Then I noticed it. At first it was subtle, a packet missing from my trolley. I thought maybe I'd set it down somewhere, retraced my steps, nothing. Then it happened again right in front of me. A hand dipped into my trolley, quick, practiced, like it belonged there. I turned and saw her, mid-40s maybe, sharp eyes, that kind of confidence that says she doesn't expect to be questioned. Excuse me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's mine. She didn't even flinch. You can get another one, she said, already turning away. Stop complaining. I stood there for a second like my brain needed to reboot. Then I followed her, heart picking up speed. Why are you taking my things? I asked, words catching slightly on the way out. I hated that, the stutter showing up when I needed clarity the most. That's when she really looked at me. God, stop talking, she snapped. You sound like a broken record. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. What's wrong with you? You need help just to speak? That's pathetic. She didn't just take your things. She saw you struggling to speak and decided that was the softest place to dig in. People like her look for cracks, and you were already doing everything you could to hold yourself together. She didn't find weakness, she just showed you exactly who she was. It hit harder than I expected, not just the words, but the way she said them, like she'd found a button and decided to hold it down. I felt my chest tighten, thoughts scrambling, and suddenly I couldn't get a sentence out clean. My hand started shaking. I tried again, softer this time, but she cut me off. Seriously, are you stupid or something? She went on. No wonder you need someone to hold your hand in here. That was it. The noise of the store blurred like someone had turned the volume down on everything except her voice. I could feel the breakdown coming, that familiar wave where everything stacks up at once. I started crying, not even able to stop it, and someone must have called it in because I heard Linda's voice crackle over the radio a second later. When Linda arrived, she didn't ask questions right away. She stepped between us, calm but firm. That's enough, she said to the woman. You need to leave her alone or you'll be asked to leave the store. The woman laughed, loud and ugly. Oh, so now you're defending this little freak, she said. And then, just to make sure she crossed every line in the room, she threw out a slur at Teresa and called her a snitch. It was like watching someone light their own exit sign. Linda didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Out, she said, pointing toward the doors. Now. The woman scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and finally left, but not before throwing me one last look like this was somehow my fault. Teresa stayed with me while I tried to get my breathing under control. Linda crouched down slightly, keeping her voice low. "You're all right," she said. "You're safe here." Once I could actually speak again, Teresa offered to run through my list for me. "I'll be quick," she said. "You just sit with Linda for a minute." I nodded, too drained to argue, and let them take over. For about 5 minutes, I sat at the customer service desk, sipping water, trying to pull myself back together. When Teresa came back, everything on my list was neatly in the trolley. "Mission accomplished," she said with a small grin. We went through checkout together, and Linda quietly knocked 10% off the total. "For the trouble," she said, like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. They called a taxi for me, and I waited outside near the edge of the parking area, leaning against one of those metal barrier posts. The air was cooler out there, easier to breathe. Teresa came out a minute later, just to check on me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, even though my eyes were still puffy. That's when the voice came back. "You." I turned, and there she was again. Like the day hadn't had enough of her already. "You little B-word," she screamed, loud enough to echo across the lot. "You got me kicked out. I'm gonna mess you up, you hear me?" She charged at me before I could even process it. I pushed myself off the post just as she swung a kick at me, and there was this sharp, awful crunch that didn't come from me. She dropped instantly. For a second, everything froze. Then she started screaming, clutching her foot, yelling, "Assault!" like she hadn't just tried to land the first hit. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It came out half hysterical, half relieved, like my brain had finally found a way to release everything at once. Teresa shot me a look. "Not the time," she said, though there was a hint of disbelief in her voice, too. An ambulance got called, so did the police. While she lay there shouting about court and lawsuits, Linda was already inside pulling CCTV footage. When the officers arrived, they watched the clip, her charging, her kicking, me stepping aside, and one of them actually let out a short laugh before catching himself. They still took statements. Teresa helped me call my Aunt Mandy, who came down and stayed with me while I answered questions. When I struggled to get words out, she filled in the gaps, calm and steady. The officers wrapped it up quickly after that. No confusion, no gray area. Mandy drove me home instead of waiting for the taxi. As we loaded the bags into her car, I went back to thank Linda and Teresa properly. I hugged Linda, something I don't usually do, but it felt right. "You did really well," she told me, like I'd passed some invisible test. On the drive home, everything finally started to settle. The shaking stopped, the noise in my head quieted down, and somewhere in all of it, there was this small, stubborn thought that refused to leave. She tried to take things that weren't hers. She tried to take control of the situation. She even tried to take a swing at me. All she really took was herself out. So what do you guys think? For me, story 3 lands hardest. Melissa's consequences were social, and the stepfathers were reputation-based, but the woman in the shop was physical. She escalated every chance she got, from stealing from a trolley to mocking a disability to charging at someone in a car park. She assumed she could do all of that and still come out on top. She ran straight into a metal post, a store full of people who saw what she did, and a legal system that didn't care about her excuses.